The other day, I was grabbing a quick lunch at a beef bowl chain in Tokyo, and I struck up a conversation with a woman working the counter. She was probably in her late 40s, moving with a kind of mechanical efficiency that only comes from years of the same shift. When the news on the wall-mounted TV mentioned the upcoming election and the dawn of a true two-party system, she didn't cheer or even roll her eyes. She just gave this hollow, tired laugh. "Two parties," she said, wiping down a tray. "It's like choosing between two different brands of the same bottled water. One might have a prettier label, but they both taste like nothing." She told me she'd been a non-regular worker for 15 years. No bonuses, no real job security, just a cycle of contracts. To her, the politicians shouting about regime change on TV looked like they were from a different planet. She pointed out that whether it was the Liberal Democratic Party or the fresh opposition, the people in suits all seemed to be former bureaucrats or second-generation elites. She didn't see a single person who looked like her, or who understood that her life wasn't a policy issue. It was a daily struggle. There was this chilling moment of clarity in what she said. We've spent over 30 years in Japan trying to fix politics by changing the rules of the game, tweaking seat counts and electoral systems, expecting a two-party system to just appear out of thin air. We act as if the number of parties is the problem. But looking at that woman, it became obvious. A two-party system isn't something you build with legislation. It's something that has to be born from the actual soil of society. Right now, Japanese politics is a hollow shell. We have the generic LDP fighting the authentic LDP, while the actual foundation of the country, the millions of non-regular workers and women facing structural disadvantage, remains completely unrepresented. We are obsessed with the form of democracy while the substance has evaporated. If we keep ignoring the people standing at the counter, we might find that our stable system isn't just hollow. It's standing on the edge of a collapse we've seen once before.
Wow. That just completely nails it. That interaction right there, it perfectly captures the silent crisis we're dealing with.
Yeah, it really does. And welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. I mean, we usually think of a democratic crisis as this loud, explosive event, right?
Right, like riots in the streets, government buildings being stormed, the obvious stuff.
Exactly. But what we're looking at today is a totally different kind of emergency. It's a quiet, slow-motion hollowing out of the entire social contract.
It's the difference between a house burning down and a house being eaten by termites. From the outside, the structure looks completely fine, the roof is there, the lights are on, but if you were to lean against the wall, you'd go right through it.
That is exactly the state of Japanese democracy right now. We have the form, the elections, the parliament, the constitution, but the substance, that actual connection between the people and the power, is just gone.
And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack exactly how that happened. How does a democracy that looks so incredibly stable and wealthy on the outside become this hollow shell on the inside?
Right. And to do that, we're pulling together some fascinating threads today. We're looking at some brilliant political theory, historical analysis of Japan's lost 30 years, sociological data on the employment ice age, and the nitty-gritty of electoral mechanics.
And when you layer all of that together, you hit this core tension, the dangerous illusion of the two-party system.
That's the big lie, isn't it? The idea that Japan has been trying to manufacture this system from the top down.
Absolutely. For decades, the political classes believed that if they just tweak the rules enough, a healthy democracy will magically appear. But a real political system has to grow organically. It has to be born from the soil of society.
And they've completely ignored that soil. So let's talk about the people actually living in this system. I want to bring in another perspective that really highlights this unrepresented majority. Take Satomi, for instance.
She's a perfect example of what we're talking about.
Right. So if you ask Satomi about her life, she'll tell you quite bluntly, "I'm 44 years old, I live in Saitama, and I'm juggling 3 part-time jobs."
3 jobs, just to stay afloat.
Yeah. She says, in the morning, I'm stocking shelves at a convenience store. In the afternoon, I clean office buildings. And at night, I drive for a delivery app.
And the irony is she might be cleaning the very offices of the politicians who pretend she doesn't exist.
Exactly. And she says that to her, politics is just a theatrical performance. She watches the news on her phone during her breaks, and the politicians are speaking a language she literally doesn't relate to.
Because they aren't speaking to her.
Right. She says, I stopped voting, not because I'm lazy, but because the ballot box is completely empty. That breaks my heart, but it's such a calculated, rational realization. She belongs to this massive demographic of non-regular workers, and nobody represents her.
Which brings us perfectly to this crucial concept of the substructure versus the superstructure. It sounds like academic jargon, but it's actually the key to understanding this entire mess.
Break that down for us, because it really clicked for me when I read about it.
Think of society as a building. The substructure is the foundation. It's the gritty reality of people's lives, class, labor, daily survival, how you pay your rent.
So Satomi juggling 3 precarious jobs. That's the substructure.
Now, the superstructure is the house built on top of that foundation. It's the party politics, the laws, the ideologies.
Okay, so in a healthy system, the house actually fits the foundation.
Exactly. The parties grow out of the substructure. Historically, you had industrial workers forming labor unions, and those unions birthed labor parties. You had capital and business owners, and they formed conservative parties. The politics mirrored the reality on the ground.
But in Japan today, that mirror is totally shattered.
It's worse than shattered. It's reflecting a ghost. The substructure in Japan has radically transformed over the last 30 years, but the political parties, the superstructure, haven't changed at all.
They're still acting like it's 1985.
Yes. They're still trying to appeal to this myth of the all-middle-class society. Back in the 80s, 90% of the country identified as middle class. Lifetime employment was the standard.
But that's just not the reality anymore. Since the 90s, there's been this massive rise in non-regular workers. It's nearly 40% of the workforce now.
Almost half the working population. We're talking part-timers, contract workers, dispatch labor, people with no bonuses, 0 job security, and practically no safety net.
And yet, there is no major precarious workers' party. The opposition parties don't look like Satomi. They're what we call the generic LDP.
Right. The opposition is dominated by the exact same urban elites, former bureaucrats, and lawyers as the ruling party. They don't fight for her because they don't fundamentally understand her life.
And we really need to highlight that this isn't just an economic issue. It's massively gendered. Women form a structural underclass in this economy.
You cannot separate gender from this economic crisis. In Japan, gender dictates your economic position. Women are overwhelmingly pushed into that non-regular workforce.
That's the M curve we hear about, right?
Yes. Women enter the workforce, then they're often forced out or sidelined when they have children, and when they come back, they can only get part-time, dead-end jobs.
And the political system just treats this like a charity case.
Politicians treat women as objects of welfare, like, oh, let's give them a little childcare subsidy. They treat them as people to be cared for rather than subjects of power who deserve actual political representation.
They don't want them at the table. They just want to toss them some crumbs to keep them quiet.
Exactly.
So how did we get here? Because Japan wasn't always like this. We have to talk about the lost 30 years.
Right. Japan is the only developed country to suffer through over 30 years of persistent deflation and economic stagnation.
And the biggest victims of that were the Ice Age generation.
These are the people who graduated into the massive post-bubble bust from the early 90s into the mid-2000s. They did everything right. They studied hard, passed the brutal exams.
But when they went to get a job, the door was just slammed in their faces.
Shut completely. But here is the most crucial and, frankly, the most disturbing part of this whole history. This shift to precarious labor wasn't an accident.
It wasn't just the invisible hand of the market.
No, it was deliberate policy. If you look back at the 1995 Nikkeiren Report, that's the Japan Federation of Employers Associations, they literally published a strategy called the New Era of Japanese Management.
And what did that report actually say?
It explicitly called for dividing the workforce. It said companies needed to protect a small core of elite employees with lifetime security, mostly older men, and surround them with a massive periphery of flexible, disposable, non-regular labor.
Wow. So they knowingly threw the younger generation under the bus to protect the older establishment.
Exactly. They protected the LDP's core voting base by sacrificing the youth.
Brutal. But what's even crazier is how they sold it to the public. They weaponized the language so people wouldn't revolt.
The rhetoric was incredibly calculated. Think about the term parasite singles.
And that was everywhere. The media pushed this idea that young people, especially young women, were just spoiled, that they lived with their parents so they could buy luxury bags, rather than admitting the economy was broken.
Right. It reframed a severe economic struggle as a moral failing.
And then came the NEETs and the freeters.
Not in education, employment, or training. They took a structural lack of jobs and turned it into a character flaw. They called them lazy.
It's the ultimate gaslighting. It's that whole culture of jiko-seikin.
Self-responsibility, the neoliberal mantra. If you are poor, it is entirely your fault.
And you can see why that works so well for the government. If Satomi internalizes that shame, If she believes her 3 jobs are a result of her own failure, she's not going to march in the streets.
She won't organize. She won't demand better policies. She'll just quietly work herself to the bone.
Okay, but surely people tried to fix this politically. I mean, we've had so-called reforms for decades.
Oh, there was plenty of tweaking of the machine, but it completely failed.
This brings me to Kenji's perspective. Kenji is a retired civil servant down in Osaka. And he says, look, I remember the buzz around the 1994 electoral reforms. I even voted for the regime change in 2009.
He had hope.
He really did. But he told this story about standing in the rain recently at a rally for some new third force political party. And he said, I felt this crushing déjà vu. The candidate was shouting the exact same slogans about breaking vested interest that I heard 30 years ago. Kenji realized that this whole two-party system thing is just a change of clothing for the exact same elite class. He's totally disillusioned with institutional fixes.
And Kenji is completely right to feel that way. His experience is a textbook case of what we call institutional fetishism.
Institutional fetishism.
It's the naive belief that if you just change the rules, the form of democracy, the substance will magically heal itself.
Like the 1994 electoral reform.
Exactly. The goal was to create a British or American-style system. They moved from multi-member districts to single-member districts, combined with proportional representation.
The idea being that it would force a two-party system where power alternates smoothly.
Right. But it backfired spectacularly. Why? Because you can't ignore the substructure. First, you have malapportionment.
Where a rural vote is worth way more than an urban vote.
The districts are drawn so the shrinking rural areas have disproportionate power, and the LDP relies on those strongholds.
Because of pork barrel politics.
Exactly. The LDP buys loyalty by funneling public works, bridges, roads, tunnels into those rural areas. It's a clientelist system. You can't beat a new highway with an abstract speech about political reform.
Right. And then there's the rule that honestly blew my mind when we were digging into this. Dual candidacy.
Ah, the zombie politicians.
It is the most ridiculous system I've ever heard of. Walk us through how this works.
Okay, so a candidate can run for a local district seat and simultaneously be placed on their party's proportional representation list.
So say I run against you in a district. The voters actively hate my policies. They vote for you and lose. Normally, I'd go home and find a new career.
Right. In a functioning democracy, you're out. But in Japan, if your party ranks you high enough on the PR list, you get resurrected.
A zombie.
Exactly. You lost your race, the voters rejected you, but you still get a seat in parliament.
It completely destroys the concept of accountability. It just protects the incumbents and keeps fresh blood out.
It fortifies the iron triangle, the bureaucracy, big business, and the LDP. They are practically untouchable.
Which explains why the opposition failed so miserably when they actually did take power in 2009.
Yes, the Democratic Party of Japan. They tried to break the triangle, but they had the same types of candidates, former bureaucrats, and they lacked a real substructure base. They didn't have strong labor unions backing them.
So they just became generic LDP clones.
And they naturally shifted rightward to try and steal LDP voters, completely abandoning the unrepresented classes.
So while all these elites are playing musical chairs with election laws, the social contract is just completely disintegrating.
And that has devastating long-term consequences.
Which leads to the third perspective I want to bring in. And this one is arguably the most terrifying for the future of the country. This is Haruto.
The quiet exit.
Exactly. So Haruto is a young university grad in Tokyo. He says, I played by all the rules. I studied constantly, beat the exam hell, got into a top-tier university.
He bought into the meritocracy myth.
He totally did. But when he graduated, the promise of lifetime security was gone. He says, I'm just trapped, bouncing from one short-term contract to another.
Because the regular employee track has shrunk so much.
Right. Haruto says he was watching this political debate on TV, and this second-generation politician was talking about the vibrancy of youth. And Haruto didn't get angry. He didn't yell at the screen. He said he just felt totally numb. He realized the system is a closed loop of inherited prestige. He told me, I don't rebel, I'm just drifting away.
That numbness is the collapse of the social contract. Haruto represents millions of young people who have just quietly exited the democratic process.
And that feeds right into silver democracy, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The demographics dictate the politics. The elderly vote in massive numbers, so they get the protection pensions, healthcare.
While the youth are shrinking in numbers and have zero representation.
And because they don't vote, the politicians ignore them even more. It's a death spiral for youth representation.
And the education system plays a huge role in this passivity, too.
It does. Schools in Japan emphasize passive learning, rote memorization. You do not challenge authority.
Political education is basically taboo, right?
Completely. Teachers are terrified of being accused of bias, so they just avoid current events entirely. It breeds obedience. It creates a citizenry that doesn't even know how to challenge the state.
So the state just becomes completely hollowized.
Yes. The substructure has fully detached from the superstructure. The state operates on autopilot. Laws pass, taxes are collected, but the soul of democracy is dead. The belief that government works for the people has evaporated.
And a vacuum like that is incredibly dangerous, because we know from history that empty vessels don't stay empty forever.
No, they don't. And this brings us to the real danger of the generic versus authentic dynamic.
Because if the opposition has no real base, they try to win by just looking like competent managers.
They try to be the LDP, but slightly less scandalous.
But voters aren't stupid. If I have to choose between the authentic LDP, the guys who actually hold the purse strings and have the connections, and a generic copy, I'm voting for the real thing.
Why buy the knockoff brand when the genuine article is right there?
So the opposition just keeps drifting further right to compete, and that leaves a massive vacuum on the left.
40% of the workforce, the non-regular workers, have literally no one fighting for them.
And this historical parallel really shook me. The comparison to the 1930s. The Taizei Yokusankai.
The Imperial Rule Assistance Association. It is a chilling warning.
So what exactly happened then?
In the pre-war period, Japan actually had political parties, but they were unrooted. They were completely disconnected from the brutal economic reality of the rural poor.
They were hollow.
Yes. And because they were hollow, they were weak. Eventually, they didn't even put up a fight. They just voluntarily collapsed and merged into the Imperial Rule Assistance Association.
Basically creating a one-party authoritarian state overnight.
Exactly, a total consolidation of power. And the warning here is that we could see a second coming of that.
Not with military boots marching down the street, though.
No, it looks like stability. It looks like the LDP securing a supermajority simply because the opposition is so hollow it ceases to exist. It's a state where dissent isn't violently crushed, it's just structurally impossible.
No alternative is even imaginable. So the obvious question, the one anyone listening is probably screaming right now, is why don't they revolt? You have this massive underclass, you have a broken contract. Why aren't people taking to the streets? Is it suppression or is it in their heads?
It's a mix of both. It's the chicken or the egg. The system creates massive barriers to entry. Did you know the deposit money just to run for national office is 3 million yen? Dang. That's like $20,000 just to get on the ballot. Satomi could never afford that.
Never. The districts are gerrymandered, the financial barriers are huge, but it's also the culture we talked about earlier, the Jiko Sekinen.
The self-responsibility.
Right. When citizens are trained to blame themselves for structural poverty, they don't revolt against the state, they just quietly endure it.
And the media is totally complicit in this.
Oh, the media is part of the establishment. They treat politics like a sport. Who's up, who's down, which faction is winning. They almost never cover the actual policy impacts on the vulnerable.
They're the ones who push the parasite single narrative.
Exactly.
So where does this end? Does this hollow shell just keep standing indefinitely?
The analysis points to a very grim future if things don't change. Because this kind of stability is actually incredibly fragile. It lacks resilience.
Because there's no social trust holding it together.
Right. If a massive crisis hits, an economic shock, a natural disaster, a geopolitical event, the shell could easily shatter.
And that apathy doesn't just stay apathy. No. It mutates. It flows into populism, exclusionism, fandom politics. When people are ignored for decades, they become desperate for anyone who actually sees them.
Even if that person is a dangerous demagogue.
Exactly.
Man, what a journey today. We started at a beef bowl shop with a woman who felt totally invisible, and we traced that feeling all the way through the lost decades, the rigged election laws, and the chilling history of the 1930s.
And it all points back to that tragedy of the two-party myth. You cannot build a house from the roof down. You have to build the foundation, the substructure first.
Japan has become a democracy in name only. It's a machine that functions mechanically, but the human connection is totally severed.
It's a cautionary tale about prioritizing form over substance.
And that's really the final thought to take away from this deep dive, this hollowing out we're seeing in Japan. It's not isolated. We're seeing versions of this in democracies across the globe. When you prioritize the institutional form over actually representing your most vulnerable citizens, you are playing a very dangerous game. If you ignore the people at the counter long enough, you don't just lose an election, you lose the democracy itself.
That's the reality we have to face.
See you next time.